afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel discussion on key metrics and strategies for defining and measuring supply chain success in your SSO, shared service organizations. This is Sandesh Kurkal, Strategy, Solution and Transformation Leader for NeoTangent, and I'll be moderator for this session today. And we have two incredible experts for this today's session. Sangram Bhosle, Chief Procurement Officer, PG&E, and Javelin Larson, Vice President, Strategic Sourcing at Wells Fargo. They bring a wealth of knowledge in the area of strategic procurement, supply chain, as well as supply chain management. We have about 30 minutes for the entire discussion today and the last 5 minutes for the Q&A. Before we dive into the specifics of supply chain management, let's set the stage, right? A recent SSON survey that says approximately around 41% of the organizations, they do not track the value of value generated by the supply chain, right? Supply chain functions within the GPS. Almost it's nearly half of the organization. That's really surprising. Now, I really want to hear from you, Sangram, like what are all the key metrics that you have seen in the organization that you think in the supply chain processes which are really critical, and how do you prioritize them? We want to hear from you.
Sure. Big fan of metrics. Reason is, they're a quantifiable way to measure the progress of an organization to its goals. They also serve multiple purposes. You're using metrics to create accountability, create transparency, drive continuous improvement, create alignment within the organization. You're using those to benchmark, to identify improvement opportunities, maybe even to create a business case to invest in the organization. So when you think about metrics overall across the supply chain or procurement function, I'm thinking of you start with a hierarchy of metrics with, could be 3 to 5 to 10 metrics for every sub-function, and you roll that up, you could end up with literally 100, 200 metrics. And so the way I think about metrics, to put it into layman's terms, would be if you look at our human body, there's probably hundreds of things you could measure. Just the blood test, you could measure 50 different things. And yet when we go to the doctor's office, what are they checking for? Your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your temperature. So if I think from that lens of simplistically, what are the key metrics, not just for procurement, but any function, there is 4 areas I would look at. 3 of those are, how is the function doing within the 4 walls of that function? What are we doing to drive efficiency? And within that, there's 3 areas, right? Financial. And if it's procurement, I'm measuring, okay, what value am I delivering in dollars to the organization? The second dimension is operations. And when I think about, again, procurement, customers want to know speed. How fast are we doing what we're doing? And so cycle time is a great metric for that. We typically measure procure to contract, or on the transaction type. On the transaction side, the procure to pay cycle time. And then the third dimension is compliance. And compliance rate is a good measure for doing that. If I look at it, that's to measure within the 4 walls, but what's most important for all of us, no matter which function we are coming from, is what is the perception the business has or the customer has of how we are doing. And what I find is there's one metric, if you ask me kind of what are the few, one metric that captures it most succinctly is the Net Promoter Score. Where you're really asking, would you refer our services to a friend? So in a nutshell, metrics are great for driving efficiency within the function and driving effectiveness and measuring effectiveness from the customer's point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Sangram. How about you, Javelin? What is your thought working in larger enterprises? How do you look at the supply chain metrics, and what are all the top three metrics that you see?
So the medical device and financial industries have unique requirements. Organizations really need to prioritize metrics that captures or reflect specific industry requirements as well as supply chain goals. The medical device has a stringent regulations when it comes to safety, traceability, and so the focus primarily is on compliance, risk management, and customer-centric service levels. An example of which is compliance with regulatory standards such as FDA and ISO. These measures adherence to industry regulations for safety, quality, and manufacturing standards, because non-compliance of which could lead to fines and product recall or market withdrawals. For the finance industry, the focus is on service efficiency, compliance of course, data security, and customer satisfaction or customer experience. For GBS, for financial industries, focus is likely kind of the same, but a little bit of a spin-off around operational deliveries standards, and also around reducing operational risk and improving client relationships. So the example around there is on the detection of fraudulent transactions. This measures supply chains ability to be able to detect fraudulent transactions and activities within the system. Another one is audit compliance. If you have a very good audit compliance, typically you will not have to spend a lot more money in doing some remediation work. So it is important that you get it right, and this measures your ability to be able to whether pass or fail, and it retains integrity within that of the financials.
Quite interesting. The thing is, though it is supply chain management or the procurement, it's interesting to see how it differs at industry level. Though it is a one process, but at industry level, depending on the priorities, it varies across industries. Let's talk about tail spend. With your experience, Sangram, can you provide some insights on how do we identify, how do we classify the tail spends, and probably maybe you may want to throw some insights on how do you engage the entire, how do you drive the entire tail spend management program, and what are all the benefits, and how do you drive it at a long term?
Sounds good. Hey, so I see some different colored tags. Presumably not everybody is from procurement, so a quick, reset on what is tail spend management we're talking about. For the layman, or in procurement geek speak, it really is a process for identifying, addressing, and optimizing these high volume but low dollar transactions that typically a procurement team is not actively managing. So I'll give you a quick example. So I joined PG&E recently, and so one of the first things I did was look at our supply profile. And so PG&E, for context, we are a regulated utility for gas and electric in the northern part of California, and we spend about $13 billion annually on goods, materials, equipment, services. 13 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 billion across 10,000 suppliers, rounded up. 300 suppliers make up 80% of our spend. So it's not even an 80-20, right? And it's going to vary by company, but when I look at ourselves, do we need 10,000 suppliers? Surely we need 300. What is the optimal number? It's probably a few thousand suppliers that we can collapse and consolidate and drive some value out of. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, and we are just starting the Tailspin program. And having done this before, really there are three solution sets available in the marketplace today. First is very labor driven, where you can either bring in staff out, but most of the times companies are outsourcing this to a third party to manage the tail spend, typically in low labor markets. The challenge with this approach is that it's not very scalable and not very agile, if you will. What you see more coming into the market now is the technology-based platforms to manage tail spend. Still a little early in the infancy. I think there's good potential there, but what I see is low adoption rates and not great ROI. The third model is more the digital hybrid of the first two, where you have a platform to do the intake process, the simple solutions, you're using AI to do some automated negotiations, and then you have a human in the loop to take care of more of the complex and the one-off kind of, and it is the best combination for agility, for scalability, and then cost. Interestingly, there's the fourth model that seems to be more on the rise, which is the integrated tailspend management approach, where essentially you're going hands-off to one supplier for all of tailspend management. Gotcha. And essentially you're making one payment and they're managing your supply base, onboarding, offboarding, payment terms, and all of it. So that's kind of the way you would manage but how do you sustain it, which is the most critical, is if you don't have, the reason you get into the situation is a weak or a lack of a governance program. And it's very important to have a good governance to make sure that as you continue to move, you're not continuing to proliferate suppliers, you're driving costs, and you're driving efficiency in the procurement process and driving compliance.
Got you. Pretty interesting. While Sangram touched upon the consolidation, maybe Javelin, you may want to elaborate on that subject, because consolidation in the area of the end-to-end supply chain it's a trendy now.
Yes.
Considering the middle office, the neo-tangent, we are specialized in the orchestration of the entire middle office and consolidating entire end-to-end supply chain. So why don't you bring some insights on the consolidation of the tailspend?
Yeah. So consolidation of so a lot of times tailspend is spread across so many small vendors, and that poses a lot of challenge, like what Sangram did in the governance and in contract risk mitigations and all of that. So the faster you can consolidate all of these small dollars, the better for the organization to be able to take advantage of grouping it together and categorizing it in one bucket, where you could take advantage of renegotiating terms and conditions and pricing, and or even you could even do a look at other vendors to be able to achieve your objectives around that. So I've done a lot of this with so many mergers and acquisition. The faster you can do it, the better synergy savings that you could achieve.
Interesting. Well, I think we touched the traditional spend management. Let's touch on the subject of technology, right? One of the interesting thing that came out from the SSON survey, it says 40% of the organizations are already adapting AI in their procurement and the supply chain management, and almost 46% of the organizations, they are actually planning to get into that direction. So why don't you, throw some insights on the data analytics in the area of procurement as well as supply chain management?
Thank you for that great question. So by adapting AI and data analytics tools, it will help companies to ascertain certain things that could really give them a value, being valued as a partner of their stakeholders. Data analytics could help give companies a deeper insights and informed decisions that really would support their objectives. One example that I could give you is cost reductions using spend analytics. So when you use analytics to be able to tell you the story of where you're at in your current engagements and to be able to tie it to your objectives, it will give you an idea of pricing, terms, and conditions. Those are the things that you're going to focus, right? So from there, it will give procurement specialists some ideas of where they would target their negotiations. And also, predictive AI could help you in instances where there are market disruptions or prices fluctuations and some other scenarios, various scenarios that we may not anticipate, just like the COVID one, right? So this will help organizations to plan better for future and already put some contingency plans to be able to carry on the products and the services that they're providing to their customers so that there is lessening of business disruptions. And from that, you will not lose a lot of integrity because the customer has the confidence in your service delivery. So business continuity is always in the upfront of anything that we have to do with predictive AI.
Agreed.
Can I just add
Yeah,
something?
please.
AI technology has great potential, but the one thing I see is the importance of change management is frequently not adequately addressed, which can result in suboptimal results. Typically, there's a tendency to see technology kind of as a panacea, and when you go to different organizations, have different cultures, different maturity levels, but coming from utility is a 100-year-old industry, you have a lot of people that have been doing the same thing for year over year. They're used to the technology, they're used to, and the first thing you talk about technology, you talk about automation, what goes through their mind? Am I going to lose my job? Right? And so ensuring that you communicate the benefits, reassuring that that's not the goal, is extremely important to that adoption, which is then gives you the maximum benefits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Considering, I think, continuing the same subject, the benefits out of the entire transformation. Now, how do you see, Sangram, how do you actually balance between the cost and the service delivery? Because a lot of organizations, they try to either they focus more on the service delivery, but there will be a compromise on the cost element. And in parallel, there will be a focus more on the cost, but there is a compromise in the area of delivery. How do you see, what are all the strategies that you think that can be applied here to balance between these two?
That's a great question, and we could probably spend a whole hour on that, which I don't think we have. It's a very, very relevant question for us, all of us, frankly, when you look at the geopolitical environment, which means it's impacting your supply chains unless you're, a local service provider. And what's happened over the last couple of months, even with 6 executive orders around tariffs with different countries that address raw materials, subcomponents, finished products. So, on one side, you're trying to balance the continuity of supply, on-time delivery. The other side, you're managing costs. And I wish there was one answer. but I'll give you maybe a few ways that we are thinking about it. So first thing is, segmenting the supply chain into what are the categories, if you will, of products or services that are critical versus the non-critical. If I think about the utility as an example, transformers are the bottleneck right now. I mean, I don't see one utility that doesn't have issues with connecting customers like Costco's and residentials. They want to come on, but we don't have transformers to connect these folks. So I'm not worried about cost at this point, I'm worried about supply. And wherein lead times have gone from less than a year to 4 years. There are other components, of course. There's a lot of stuff we buy, pipes and poles, and I'm not worried about those. I can continue to focus on cost, so it's making sure that there's that right balance. The second aspect is the scenario planning. With this, I just talked to you about the tariffs. Most companies, because of the reciprocal nature of the tariffs now, doesn't matter whether you're an importer, exporter, or both, you're going to be impacted by that. And that, like I said, in the last 2 months, almost every couple of weeks, we've had new information coming, right? And it's dynamic. So scenario planning is kind of my approach to keeping up to speed on what the impact is going to be. Because my CEO is going to calls me and says, hey, what does this mean? What does this mean this new tariff came out? Or this new geopolitical situation that's going on. And so I'm looking at kind of my near-term, middle-term, and longer-term strategies. In the nearest term, I have the option to change the mix on my supply base, where I buy from. I've got suppliers, I've got international, I've got domestic. I can optimize those to kind of minimize the near-term impacts. When I look at longer term, medium term, we go and specify certain components. I mean, when I look at ceramic related bushings and on our transformers, they come from China. China is the sole provider of that. I'm going to have to find a longer term solution for that in looking at different alternate materials and so forth. And then subcomponents, sometimes we specify which, and changing where they are manufactured and working with the manufacturers to shift that is kind of the middle term strategy. So it's that scenario planning that allows me to tell my CEO, look, immediate terms, here's my impact, but if I can work with the different levers, I can manage it to this level. And that's kind of how I'm approaching it. There's a whole area of partnerships that, again, I know we're short on time, so partnerships is another big area. It was always there, but it's becoming ever more so important because of the labor shortages. We are hearing from our suppliers, look, don't send me an RFP for one project here, one wind farm, one solar farm that you want to build. We just don't have the labor, and trying to move labor just for one or two, not going to do it. So that's caused us to change our strategy to bundle of projects, looking at the 3 to 5 year plan and take that bundle to the market and get them to, and it creates another strategy around alliances where we are also looking at the portfolio and saying, we want partners for solar that we work together on. There's one way to do it. We drive the total cost down through that partnership. They understand our ways of working, our safety requirements, and through that learning as you go, you continue to drive the total cost down. So I'll leave it at that.
Can I just add a little bit of that? So in the service side, we do some creative works around contracting. So we do some multi-year contracts, but with the assurance of language around termination for convenience with no penalty, and assuring also transition assistance, and while you're keeping your options in the future. So there's a lot of cost-saving ways that you could.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
And both of you will definitely agree that there is also a requirement of bridging and also building the relationship between these two organizations. One is the CFO organization, which actually is responsible for providing the visibility in terms of cost and monitoring it, and also the other organization, which is COO or Chief Supply Chain Officer or procurement officer, bridging the gap between these two and having that seamless integration between these two organizations becomes very much important in bridging the gap between this cost and service. I think considering the time, let us also we have a lot of questions, but considering the time that we have, maybe we will spend 5 minutes for for you all. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Please.
So, would you say that the future of the sales space is outsourcing these type of services? And second question would be about how to manage that relationship with the service provider, how to keep up with the risk and set KPIs, things to make sure that the service is still on top and the quality is not lost, or basically that.
So, in my view, broadly speaking, whether it's tailspin outsourcing or any services, I can see an evolution from being cost centers to a value creation centers, right? Looking at these as how do we create value and not just be a cost center. So it's going to require us to think differently. And then the second thing I see in changing is where a lot of the contractual frameworks are based on service level agreements, moving towards more outcome based agreements. I don't know if you want.
And I think the key to that one is really training. If you're going to outsource it, right? Training, letting those people understand the process. And it's just not like understanding that there's a checklist, because especially in the industry that I work for, it's highly regulated, right? So it is important for them to do some critical thinking and be able to understand the industry that we are operating. So train your people very well.
Understand the process, not that checklist. Thank you.
It's also important that how do we unchain this, because a lot of things in considering the audience that we have in the shared service organizations or the GBS organization, it is very important how do we unchain or how do we decode the processes. That is very, very critical. I think if we apply the same logic into these tailspins, and it actually helps in consolidating the business more. Any further questions from anyone? Okay. So very insightful questions. Thank you so much, and big thanks to Sangram as well as Javelin. Thank you all for joining us. Hope this is a fruitful session, and it has ignited some spark for your organization to drive transformation in this area. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks everyone. Thank you so much, Sangram.
Thank you.
And thank you, Javelin.
Thank you.